Mania is back with the panel of AJ and Baldy to take on another What If. Only this time we jump ahead to the early 2000s again and discuss the polarizing wrestler that is Bill Goldberg. A man who took WCW by storm with the streak, had a limited arsenal of moves, but that was okay because all we really wanted to see was the spear and the jackhammer. And when he wasn't injuring wrestlers in the ring, but he hilariously would injure himself by ramming his head into lockers to get amped up before his walk to the ring. So today, we talk Goldberg, with the panel answering, what if Goldberg's initial WWE run was booked differently? As we take a closer look at his short run with the company. But, as per usual, we start things off with a check in question. Today, I ask, besides Goldberg, who delivered the most badass spear in wrestling? For me, I'll have to go with the guy who made me wince every time he landed his spear on his victims. A man who always carried the spear in his wrestling arsenal and still pulls it off with devastating effect. I'm going with Rhino. Baldy, how about you?
That was an interesting choice. That's not the route I expected you to go. For me, when I think spear, I think edge. I feel like, he became from a tag team wrestler to a top level star, a multiple time world champion. So when I think spear, edge is the name that comes to mind. He may not have had the most devastating, but I feel like his was definitely still one of the best executed.
Edge is a big time fan favorite, but for me, he never carried, like, he didn't look sheer intimidating the
Yeah.
way Rhino did, the way
Yeah.
Goldberg did. He was a
Yeah.
small guy and he pulled it off, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as devastating as a guy like Rhino, who would
If
charge, who did the Goldberg setup. Like, he'd go in the ring, hurry in the corner, he'd get low, and he had, like, he was a shorter guy, so he had a very explosive spear.
if you look back at some of his ECW ones, those were some insane ones. Like in WWE, like I feel like he had to tone it down a bit, but if you look back at some of his ECW ones, those were very, very devastating.
Very true.
Yeah, I actually really like Rhino. He was actually going to be my choice for best spear. Just kind of what you said, TJ. His size and just when he hit those spears, like you felt it. But I kind of have to give Baldy a bit of an edge here because I think Edge, granted his stature wasn't as menacing as Rhino, Edge probably hit the most memorable spear during the TLC match. I don't think I've ever seen a better spear when I think it was Jeff Hardy hanging from the belt.
Yeah.
And then Edge just at the top of the ladder hits that spear. Like that was incredible. So I definitely give Baldy points on that. But for me, Rhino would have been my guess. But just to maybe pick someone different. I mean, there weren't a lot of wrestlers that hit the spear. So I think just kind of thinking off the cuff here, maybe I'd give it to Batista, just given his size. But he wasn't at the top of my list. But just to kind of keep things a little bit different. I mean, he was a big, muscular guy. Granted, he didn't keep it in his arsenal all the time, but he did hit it every now and then, and I think he did a pretty decent job at it.
That was an excellent use of a pun also by giving the edge to Baldy. Get it?
Yeah.
Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you got that. So today's episode, TJ, as you kind of teed it off, is talking about Goldberg and I guess how we might book his run in the WWE. So he came into the company March 2003, debuted basically the night after WrestleMania on Raw. But maybe I'll turn it over to Baldy if you wanted to give a quick kind of recap of his run and maybe just any sort of tidbits that you might know just prior to him joining the company and all the negotiations that were going on at the time.
Yeah, so as AJ had mentioned, Goldberg debuted the night after WrestleMania 19, attacking The Rock, which eventually led to a match at Backlash. But so Goldberg's contract had finished up, or his Time Warner contract had finished up in late 2002. So WWE began negotiations with him about possibly having him come in at the Royal Rumble and possibly have a match at WrestleMania. But when that didn't happen, they finalized the contract just before WrestleMania. So they had him debut the night after, which eventually led to The Rock, and it was only just a 1-year contract. So while he started off on a very, very high, The Rock was kind of on his way out, so it made sense for Rock to kind of put him over. But after that, the rest of Goldberg's run was quite underwhelming, and then it ended up with a match at WrestleMania 20 against Brock Lesnar, which a lot of people consider to be one of the more memorable WrestleMania matches, but for all the wrong
Because
reasons.
it sucked. That's what happened. It was
Yeah,
a
like
horrible match.
let's
Yeah.
not sugarcoat this. It was one of the worst matches.
It was bad. Like they were both on the way out, and neither one of them looked like had any interest in that match. So I think while this run started off high, it ended very dry, which is why he didn't end up resigning, and then he went into exile for many years, only to come out of the shadows in 2016.
So before we kind of get into his time with WWE, just kind of highlighting his time near the end of WCW and their run. When he joined WWE, like his run with the whole streak, as TJ mentioned in the intro, was red hot. Like we were all tuning in and trying to see like is he going to win again, and just his physique and everything about his whole character was pretty intimidating and something that really kind of drew eyeballs. So coming to the end of WCW, Baldy, how would you say his, I guess, character was at the time? Um, do you feel like he still had momentum near the end of WCW?
Once his streak ended, all momentum died with it. I mean, everyone can argue whether or not that was the right time to end the streak, if Kevin Nash was the right guy to end the streak, but after that happened, it was Goldberg was invincible, and they knew he would beat everybody, but once he lost, he sort of lost that invincibility, and because of his limited in-ring ability, like going forward after that, like his matches just weren't the same because he may win, he may lose. They kind of briefly did a brief heel turn with him, which again didn't work very well. Then turned him into a babyface again, and by the end of his run, by the end of WCW, like everybody was kind of like he didn't really stand out. So it was just he was just another one of the boys. Whereas while his streak was built, he was the man, and he was the biggest babyface in WCW, who was the best thing they had going. But kind of towards the end of his run, he was just kind of one of the boys, and like there was nothing really spectacular about him. So Goldberg went as far as the streak went, but once the streak went, like his career kind of went to a standstill.
Yeah, and so then when there were talks of him potentially coming to WWE, TJ, like what did you think about that? Like, was his name one that resonated with you? Like, oh my God, Goldberg's about to come to WWE, or did you kind of feel like, okay, yeah, whatever, like it just another name that doesn't really do it for me?
It's a little bit of both because of the way the invasion was handled. You do have a little bit of hesitation to see how these guys would fare when they make their jump over to the WWE. But again, having said that, still, Goldberg was an upper echelon top tier talent coming from WCW. He had a big name attached to him, and they could have redone that entire streak movement as he came into WWE. So I was really stoked. And I think anybody who says that they weren't excited about Goldberg coming into the WWE are just lying. Because again, he's a top tier guy. If he came in, the possibilities of him going at it with Lesnar, him with Angle, him with HBK, and above all, him with Austin, they could have done it so many different ways. And as a wrestling fan, you couldn't help but get excited about that. So I was super stoked.
And not to mention, I think it was pretty exciting just to think of what the WWE machine would be able to do with his character. Just kind of given the success that they've had with Brock Lesnar and like other wrestlers that had that kind of had a similar makeup.
Absolutely. He's a big physique guy. Vince knows how
Yeah.
to use him. And like you said, the WWE machine, if Bischoff and WCW could do something right with a guy like Goldberg, imagine what the possibilities could have been with the WWE machine.
Yeah, no, I agree. So as Baldy said, so he came in night after WrestleMania and debuted against not debuted, but I guess you could say he debuted with The Rock during that segment. What did you guys think about that segment? And maybe I'll start with TJ first. So when The Rock was speaking, like the fans were basically chanting his name, right? So everyone knew what was happening, especially because they had run a promo during WrestleMania, basically saying that he was going to be at Monday Night Raw. So everyone knew that he was going to be there. And when The Rock was doing his whole spiel, people kind of figured out, oh, this is when he's coming out. So that whole entrance into the WWE universe, what did you make of it?
I thought it was very underwhelming. And granted, wrestling fans were a lot smarter now than they were when he initially came out in the late 90s and stuff, and people knew. But even then, why waste a epic debut of Bill Goldberg with a trailer teaser at WrestleMania? Like, I don't understand that. Why drop saying, hey, this guy's been in exile for 2 years and he's coming in and everyone knows he's coming to Raw now? But why not have a little bit of a surprise factor for the fans that didn't know that he was going to be coming out there, or that didn't know 100% confirmed that he was going to be there for that Raw? And
Yeah,
even then, even
yeah.
like, let's say if we give them the benefit of the doubt and you're like, hey, this is what they wanted to do, and they wanted to make sure that the eyes were tuned in for Monday night and they wanted those ratings, which I still think is a cop out, because the Raw after WrestleMania, is one of the biggest shows of the year. And people,
especially with them coming off of like WrestleMania with The Rock and Stone Cold, like
for sure. But I mean, it's already going to be a highly viewed, highly rated show. So there was no need to kind of dangle that carrot of like, hey, Bill Goldberg's coming too. I felt like it was a bit useless in that regard. But even with The Rock's debut, with the debut with The Rock's cutting a promo and everything else, why do they have this guy walking around in the back with the little Harley jacket? And then his music hits, the people start chanting, and you're still waiting another 15, 20 seconds with a delay as he makes his way to the entrance. So I didn't like that. I would have just loved it if his music hit. They didn't do the walk in the back, and he just came out. I love the way they did the fireworks. He stood out there in his classic Goldberg pose, and then he comes down, had a very brief exchange, and then he went at it with The Rock, which was perfectly handled. You're going after the top guy, which is what Goldberg wanted, and I think a lot of people, at least wrestlers in the WCW faction, were like, how are they going to do this? So going after The Rock and everything else, how he took out The Rock was perfect. I felt like they could have done a little bit more when he came out.
That's actually a really funny comment you made about his music. That's something that I've always kind of thought about. There's like some entrance musics where, like Stone Cold, for example, like as soon as it hits, like he can come out and it's like the action just starts right away. But with Goldberg's music, I feel like you kind of needed that bit of time for him to kind of do his walk, because his music is kind of like that, where there's like this like really long pause before he comes out, and his walk like during his time with WWE, it did kind of create that anticipation. So while I agree, the fact that they kind of spoiled it sucked, I don't know if I would have done anything different with him kind of coming out right at the start of his music, because I don't think it would have matched with the energy. But that's just like a random kind of
like I think they kind of did that similar to what WWE did. Like every time WWE's music would hit, they'd go to backstage and you'd see the security knock on his door, and then he'd come out. So I think they kind of did it the same like they kind of built it up the same way, just without the whole security, but instead they just show him walking around backstage.
Yeah, because he has to like come out at like a certain time when the music kind of picks up a little bit more. But anyways,
he definitely does. I do agree with you in the sense that that's how WCW did it, and that's how you remember him with. But even then, the way he walked out, the way he was walking around in the back, it just fell flat for the hype that he was coming in with.
Yeah,
and there could have been so many different ways, even if they did that again, that delay. But just him walking around with a Harley jacket on, you're just watching and you're like, okay, man, anytime now. With his other entrances, it's different. There's a match. He's getting amped up. He's doing the locker. It's a security guard. It's a knock. It's all the things Baldy said.
Yeah, I definitely see your point. Baldy, what did you make of his intro?
The debut was good. Like, I like how the fact that, the Raw after WrestleMania is the biggest thing, but I personally would have, because the fact that, they were negotiating with him months before, I would have had him debut earlier, just because, hey, it's great that they have him with The Rock, but the fact that it happened at like a B-rated pay-per-view like Backlash, it just didn't feel as big. Like, if that's the route you wanted to go, like, he wanted to Goldberg Rock, or it felt like having his debut match at Backlash, even though it's The Rock, just kind of took away from it. Like, I would have rather, if you're going to have Goldberg debut, like if he was going to fight somebody at Backlash, they shouldn't have gone after Rock. They could have just had him debut a different way. Maybe, maybe like a Triple H, or maybe like a Jericho, like somebody else. But the fact that it was Rock at Backlash, like that's the kind of what did it for me, where I would have rather, if you knew you were going to sign him earlier, have him debut like, a little bit earlier, make sure he has like a marquee match at WrestleMania, and then maybe move on to Rock. Then it's one thing of like, Goldberg had his debut match at Mania. He's coming off a big win, but his debut match against The Rock at like a Backlash, that kind of
I think that might have had to do with Rock's contract. I think was running up, and I think he was going to go do movies around that time. I think maybe that's why. I think that was like the only window that they had to do something with The Rock and Goldberg. But
I think a large part of that also has to do sometimes with when you enter with a guy coming in, let's say January, February-ish, most of that build is going towards WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And a lot of your stories and a lot of your top guys were already tied up in somebody else. And
Well,
what
I
happens at
mean,
WrestleMania is you generally wrap up all your storylines and you hit the reset button, and now you start afresh.
as we're going to talk about later, and a lot of the top guys were given some of the matches they were in at WrestleMania. Like, given what we're going to get into later in this episode, it's I feel like you
I
could have gone
wonder
a
what you
different
could be
route.
alluding to right now.
Yeah.
There's one match at WrestleMania that stands out like a sore thumb.
But so basically, Baldy, what you're saying is that you were fine with his debut, though. The way that
I like the debut. Like I
Yeah.
feel like given like you said, with their hands being tied with Rock on the way out, like
But-
you want him to have an impact. It is Backlash, but you still want it to be the Rock. But yeah, I don't like the fact that they spoiled it with a promo.
Okay, would you put his debut in your like top 5 or top 10 debuts of all time?
That's a tough one. I mean, in terms of like WWE debuts, like I don't think there have been too many. The fact that like when you think about the memorable debuts, like that's a clip that is still shown because of it was Goldberg, it was Rock. Like just based on that, I think a lot of people will have it in there. But I have it in my personal top 10. I feel like there's been more that have been done differently. Like for me, one of the top debuts is probably Jericho's in WWE. Like I felt like that was done so well because of the surprise element was probably the best thing. So I feel like had WWE not done the promo the night before, I feel like it would have done so much better for it. Like
Right.
I feel like then, yeah, you know what? Just with the crowd reaction and the crowd being surprised and getting like a proper pop rather than the crowd expecting it, it might have been one of my top debuts.
I still think it's one of the most memorable ones because, again, it's one of the biggest guys from WCW.
Yeah.
And he came over to WWE finally. So I still think it's very memorable in that regard. Again, looking back, we feel like it could have done a little bit better in terms of amping up the crowd and everything else. But it was still a very memorable one. And I do think one of the top 10 ones because it's just like, holy crap, Goldberg is actually in a WWE ring.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's sort of in the same conversation as Sting with the kick of doom to Triple H. Like everyone sees that as the great deal because it was Sting's first time in a WWE ring. Like despite the kick of doom and Triple H bending over for 35 seconds, but everybody still sees it as such a top debut. But because it was Sting's first time in WWE after so many years.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so you guys keep talking about how you guys would do it better, so let's just get into it. So how, I guess maybe I'll turn to Baldy first. How would you have liked to see Goldberg debut?
I would have liked to see him debut as a surprise in the Royal Rumble. I would have liked to see him go number.
Okay, so we're
30.
talking January 2003.
I would have liked to see him debut in January. Like I get, they had WrestleMania lined up, but because at that time you had the brand switch, ultimately only one guy's going to win the Royal Rumble, but you're still going to end up having 2 world title matches at WrestleMania. So I feel like very easily you could have gone. Like I feel like it would have done more for Goldberg introducing him to a WWE audience and winning a Royal Rumble and going to WrestleMania and having that big match than Lesnar had been there for WWE for about a year. He was a mainstream name, and I think even if let's say it came down to Goldberg and Lesnar and Goldberg ended up winning, like I don't think it would have hurt Lesnar's credibility much. He could have still gone on, had that match with Kurt Angle, still been WWE champion, but I felt like it would have done more for Goldberg coming in to win the Rumble, and then Triple H ended up facing Booker T at WrestleMania 19. I feel like you could have easily gone Triple H Goldberg and have Goldberg with a title run to start off his WWE run.
TJ, what do you think about that?
I like the idea of Goldberg coming in for the Rumble. It does have that surprise element that we keep referring to, especially when we bring back Jericho's debut and stuff.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that when Goldberg was going to come in, he was going to get pushed instantly into a heavyweight title storyline.
Yeah.
So what better way to do that than have him come in, tear it up as number 30, and instantly cement himself as a number 1 contender with a whole bunch of momentum. And the biggest factor in all of this is getting the WWE home base, like that fan base behind you. Because at the end of the day, he's still a WCW guy coming over. And there's still a lot of like big time WWE hardcore fanatics are like, hey man, he's still not one of us. So no matter who he's up against, we're still going to go against a homegrown talent. So I think this would have been an excellent way to have him win over a few more fans that he didn't have when he versed The Rock, who was still a heel. Like he was a heel, but he still had more of a fan base behind him at Backlash. Goldberg was the face, and people were still cheering The Rock more.
Yeah, and I mean, you could have easily, let's say you go that route, Goldberg wins the title, you could have still easily done Goldberg Rock at Backlash for the title, and then Rock putting him over would have meant that much more because Goldberg would have already been champion.
And not only that, but let's say if you were to go with the Royal Rumble angle, he wins it, he faces, let's say, whomever. Let's say it's Triple H instead of Booker T or something. You can still have, which is what they got into anyways, the Triple H and Goldberg feud. But then you could have bypassed the whole match at Backlash. Because I agree in the sense that it's not one of your big four main events.
Yeah.
Or pay-per-view, sorry. So why waste it on a Backlash event when you could have just saved it for SummerSlam?
Yeah.
And you still would have pushed him toward Triple H. And then you still have that feud going, only now with him as champion. And so instead of having like a under 3 month championship run, which is rather underwhelming in the fall, he wins it at Mania and he carries it all the way to the end of the year. Which would have been far more memorable.
And then, is he still active though? Like, is he still fighting at Backlash, even though it's not against The Rock?
I don't think he needs. I mean, he could. Don't get me wrong.
I think he would need to, wouldn't he?
I think you'd need to, like, you
Yeah,
want,
because you can't keep him that.
You want him to defend the title.
Yeah.
You could. I don't see anything big with it. I could mind him waiting for another month because this is only a month after WrestleMania.
Yeah.
You could drag it out a little bit and go to SummerSlam. But even if he did fight at Backlash, sure, why not? I don't mind. But now it's not just like his first debut match.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I actually like the debut at Royal Rumble. You kind of kill a lot of, or at least two birds with one stone. One in the fact that I think we would all agree Goldberg's not the most technical wrestler. He's not Bret Hart in the ring. So I think like having him debut at Royal Rumble, I think you would hide a lot of his deficiencies in that type of match, while still kind of having that excitement around him, instead of people being like, "Oh, what the hell are we watching?" Right? Because like Royal Rumble isn't like a technical match, right? Like it's just a bunch of guys just punching with like one guy getting thrown over. So I like that angle. And then the second thing is that I think, and I think we can talk about this after, is if you have him and Brock Lesnar, I think as to what you were alluding to, Baldy, in the final two of the Royal Rumble, I think you kind of plant seeds into like a feud down the road. So I think, yeah, and eventually having Goldberg winning at Royal Rumble. But so getting back to the Royal Rumble, where would you have him debut? At what number?
30.
TJ?
He'd have to be 30. They did it right the following year when he came in at 30 and cleared house until he was taken out by Lesnar.
Yeah.
But 30 would have to be it.
He would have to be 30, yeah. And
it's always the biggest number when it comes to Rumble. Who's going to be the last entrant?
And then the final two, who would you have, him and Brock?
Yeah, I think you could go him and Brock, because usually what happens is it's always the two guys that end up fighting for the titles at WrestleMania, because at that time there was two brands, so you'd have to have the two guys that ultimately would end up facing the title, facing the champions at the title for WrestleMania.
And not only that, but I think Brock would have been perfect storyline wise because he was on SmackDown.
Yeah, exactly.
Goldberg was on Raw, so they could have even kept them apart for the longest time, which is when they merged over at Survivor Series when they like bumped into one another.
Exactly.
You could have done that exactly the way it was.
But you could have started it at Royal Rumble, kind of
precisely. And there's this bad blood brewing instead of like this super short little run that they had when, Lesnar comes in, costs him the Rumble, and then they're fighting at Mania.
Yeah,
it would have been a slow build, a very subtle build, up until they actually face off one another, or they do the exact same thing afterwards.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're giving Goldberg a long title run, like that would have ultimately, like, let's say his contract was going to come up and he decided, hey, for whatever reason, I'm not going to re-sign. You could end up playing the exact same angle, but instead of Goldberg costing Lesnar the title, you could have had Lesnar cost Goldberg the title to somebody.
Exactly. And imagine like fans going back and forth during this time, going, "Man, what if?"
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What if these guys weren't on separate brands? What if it wasn't just this and that? And they always used to merge the big four. So you only had a few moments where they could have intersected.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it would have been done so well, I think.
But then by the time they got to it, fans knew they were both leaving, and then it was just a shit show. Okay,
so we have Goldberg winning Royal Rumble. And, so Baldy, you were kind of alluding to this again before, but the WrestleMania card, how would you kind of change it? So who would you have Goldberg facing off at WrestleMania in 03?
What I would have done is I would not have had a long match, because at that time,
you can't with Goldberg.
well, here's the other thing. Like with Goldberg coming in, he's been off for a couple of years. You don't know what it is. Like I'd give him time to, get accumulated at the house shows, whatnot. I would have had him just completely squash Triple H in maybe 30,
At
45 seconds
WrestleMania?
at WrestleMania. Like you want to make him have an impact. He has an impact at the Royal Rumble. You kind of build it up for the title match at WrestleMania, and I would have just had him completely squash Triple H, because when you do that, you don't have it as a main event. You have it, kind of somewhere three quarters of the way, because obviously you don't want
But
that to be the main event. I know he's the Royal Rumble winner, but he's getting his title shot, but that doesn't mean it's got to be a guaranteed main event. I would have still had Angle.
Title matches are usually main event or co-main events.
And yeah,
not necessarily. Not at all.
They don't have them go back to back. Just for that reason, like I would have still had Angle Lesnar main event, but I would have had Goldberg squash Triple H at some point in the card. Just so his title win stands out that much more, rather than just being another match at WrestleMania.
There's a couple things that go for what you're saying and against what you're saying. The biggest thing that goes against what you're saying is that you're telling us Triple H is going to agree to be quashed at this time to a WCW guy at WrestleMania.
It happened against the Warrior at WrestleMania 12.
That was
but like his pull at that point versus
exactly
was completely different.
He's already being groomed as the next in command at this point.
Yeah,
and you're telling me he's going to get quashed to a WCW guy at the biggest stage of
zero chance.
Yeah, but it's
no
not
way
gonna,
that's happening.
It's not going to do anything to hurt his character.
It's going to hurt his ego, man. It's going to hurt his ego.
No, I get that.
That counts. So I don't see that happening. I think
I think that's very unrealistic.
Well, unrealistic, but I mean, I feel like that would have been like, you're not going to have Goldberg Triple H have a 15-20 minute wrestling match at WrestleMania. That's not what anybody wants to see, though.
It would work for what you're saying, because I think at that time Triple H was fighting hurt anyways. So this would have been a limited sort of interaction thing for him. And the other thing is, when he came back in 2017, 2018, that whole epic run, he was quashing guys like Kevin Owens, who he took the title off of.
Look at Goldberg when he came back.
When he demolished Brock Lesnar. You know what I mean? He took out the top two guys and a beast in Brock Lesnar in minutes.
Yeah, and that's what everybody remembers.
And that's the way you hype him up, and that's the way you build Bill Goldberg as this indestructible force of nature, where his matches are short, quick, much like Warrior.
Yeah,
people love that.
Because the thing is, the reason I say the squash match is because then at Backlash you could go back with the same main event. Like, you don't necessarily have to put him in a new feud. Then you could have him and Triple H kind of have a little bit of a, back and forth match, but at least it's at Backlash. Like, it's not WrestleMania, whereas the memorable WrestleMania match is Goldberg squashes him for the title. So
the other benefit you have with that is you can also end those matches in a no contest. So he's not going to get beat clean regardless. We already know Goldberg's not going to lose.
Yeah,
he hated losing, so he's not going to get lost. He's not going to lose in that way. I don't think he lost clean to Lesnar in 2018.
Yeah, the clean. Yeah, I mean, even when they had to get the title off,
a 1v1 kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
So you could have just done that with, again, Triple H or whomever at Backlash, and still not hurt his image and hurt his hype.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at where Goldberg went from after The Rock, it was, like I said, it was a many month build to Triple H. But in between, he's fighting Mark Henry, he's fighting Kane, he's fighting Chris Jericho, he's fighting Christian. So it became very underwhelming, and it was kind of a mix of top guys, mid-tier guys, top guys, mid-tier guys. Like, because there were so many big names on SmackDown, there were only so many guys that you could build Goldberg up against. The fact that's why his run felt so underwhelming. So when he finally got the title, it was okay. Well, you knew it was going to happen sooner or later. Whereas if you started off on top and he's champion, then what you're doing is you're building these mid card guys up into top guys where they're not going to beat Goldberg, but at least it looks like, hey, you know what, they're facing the champion. Whereas now Goldberg without the title looks like, okay, well, he's just facing all these mid card guys.
They did a couple things right. I mean, when they faced off in the Elimination Chamber at SummerSlam, he still took out guys like Orton. He took out guys like HBK. He took out guys like Jericho. So he's still beating top tier guys. Then he loses to Triple H, the stupid sledgehammer hit, which I didn't mind. I didn't. It was okay, nothing big. But they were still showing him as beating the top guys in the WWE, which they were doing right.
Right.
And they could have continued with that. To Baldy's point, along the way, as you build this bigger feud with Triple H and then branch over to Lesnar.
Yeah. I guess I would say it. So are we agreeing that it's a squash match with Triple H?
I like it. I don't see it happening in a million years, but
Let's just say that it
it
does.
makes sense. It
Hypothetically.
It
makes
does
sense.
make sense.
It
Yeah.
does
So
make sense.
okay, so you have a squash match with Triple H at WrestleMania, and I think we're all in agreement that we're working towards him versus Brock at WrestleMania in 04.
Yes, reluctantly, but the problem with this is you still end up back to Lesnar and
That
Goldberg
match. So I
at
think
that match with both of them leaving and it still being a dud of a match.
Okay,
Like the
but
highlight of that match was Austin as the referee.
right.
okay, but now that let's say in hindsight, they're both leaving. Would you still wait
Okay,
until?
wait, hold on, buddy. So before you kind of give that up, so are we still going towards Lesnar and Goldberg, or were you just about to change it, Baldy?
I was gonna change it.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead then.
So I would say, if they're both leaving, I would not wait until the end to do that match. Why not? Why not do it at Survivor Series? So you give yourself
Okay.
enough of a build, and you do it at Survivor Series. So if Goldberg is gonna be on the way out, I would have him lose at WrestleMania to Rock, because Rock ultimately ended up fighting at WrestleMania 20, and it was just whatever the wishy-washy tag match with Foley and Rock against Evolution. I would have rather, if
But then
Goldberg's.
was the Rock coming in?
Yeah, but
Or like
he was kind of in between. But Rock, like if Goldberg's gone, why not have Rock beat him? Because even if Rock's gonna leave, Rock's gonna come back. But if
But
Goldberg,
I don't know if you want to put the title on the Rock if he's just gonna leave as well.
well, no, I mean the plan was, if Goldberg's gonna leave, you're not gonna have him be champion at WrestleMania. Like obviously he's gonna lose the title somewhere down the line. Like you could have had him, like, not to say he would have lost to Lesnar at Survivor Series, but I feel like on the way to WrestleMania, you could have had Goldberg lose the title.
Okay, let's try and map that out then. Okay, so SummerSlam, who is he up against?
He's in the Elimination Chamber.
Yeah, Elimination Chamber. You could have had him lose the title in the Elimination Chamber.
Okay, so we still like that match then. So we're gonna keep that. Okay, so he loses the title there then?
I think that's a great way to protect his character, because ultimately, so many different ways. Like I would have, honestly, if he wins the title at Mania, I think that's a long enough reign. And if he's gonna wrap it up at WrestleMania,
I agree, because in that way, it's basically a 6-man match. So you do protect him in that way, and you I guess make sure that because he can still lose the title. Correct me if I'm wrong. He can still lose the title if he's not the one being pinned, right?
Well, ultimately, everybody has to be eliminated at the end. Everybody has to be eliminated. So he would have lost. Like I think that would have been the perfect way to have him lose the title. And then if he's on a 1-year contract, I would have rather done just big matches that don't have title implications leading up to WrestleMania.
Okay.
And if you're going to be planting the seed, so to speak, with Lesnar and Goldberg, what better way for him to lose in some roundabout way in that chamber with Lesnar?
Yeah,
Lesnar shows up.
I like that.
Exactly.
And then you build to Lesnar and Goldberg at Survivor Series.
And that streamlines that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so Lesnar, Goldberg at Survivor Series. Who wins that one?
That one, that's a tough one. I think at that point,
I think it has to be Goldberg, doesn't it?
Could be, but I think you could argue Lesnar there too.
Because then you can't have Goldberg lose 2 matches back to back at big pay-per-views.
That's true. I mean, at that point, you could give Goldberg some more momentum. Yeah, I think it would make sense to have him beat Lesnar.
Because if we're working towards him versus The Rock at WrestleMania, he needs to come in with some momentum.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can buy that. So he beats Lesnar at Survivor Series.
I don't mind if they go toe to toe and then they repeat it at the Rumble. And then
that's what I was just about to say.
Let's say if they do a one-off thing, he beats him, he loses, whatever it may be. He's still not going to lose clean in that sense, because you're still amping him up. The only way he lost clean at the end was because of how he ended up leaving. But
so basically, at Survivor Series, you're saying there's no disqualification.
Either or, I'm saying it doesn't really matter. You can just do it again at the Rumble.
Yeah.
And then have him enter the Rumble, and then or not enter the Rumble, and then set up for the Rock essentially.
Just kind of have their own match, and then that's where the Rock somehow gets incorporated, and then you have him.
But that's where you're pushing the Rock the storyline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could just have like a simple run in. Like you could have like basically how they played out Rock and with Goldberg and Lesnar. You could have done the same thing with Rock and Goldberg, similar in that way. Like maybe they have like some sort of run in backstage at the Rumble, and then maybe Rock comes in, has them eliminated from the Rumble, and then that eventually builds to Rock and Goldberg at WrestleMania. Like I feel like even if they kind of went down that same way, that could have been done pretty well. So I feel like that way you capitalize on Goldberg's run at its peak. Like that
Yeah.
1 year shows all the big matches he had. He had his title run, had a match with Lesnar, had a WrestleMania match, had a match with Rock, and then, ultimately Rock goes over because Goldberg's on the way out.
It would have been some solid checklists
Yeah. I
as
like
you're
that.
going through. And it kind of protects everybody also
Mm-hmm.
along the way. It's not like you're literally throwing anyone under the bus to push
Nope.
this guy.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So that's how we would, I guess, book Goldberg's run in the WWE. You guys have any kind of final thoughts there?
No, I think we touched on everything.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that Baldy and I seem to be agreeing a little bit more than usual, but
I think we need a Hulk Hogan episode next week. It'll kind of put things back into
we're not
perspective.
doing a Hulk Hogan episode, man. I'm so sick of hearing about Hulk Hogan over.
Well,
and over
I think
again.
you're not available next week anyway, so maybe me and AJ can do a Hulk Hogan episode next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that 2-minute episode.